Uh, okay, we'll just wait maybe for another moment or so as we are the first session of the morning. Hello, everybody that's joined so far. Okay, well, I guess we'll just get started. Welcome to our session on the Undergraduate Research Awards, the winners and their research. So on behalf of the award committee, I want to thank everyone for joining us to honor our research award winners and their research projects. Big shout out to our awardees, Peter Palambi, Derica Sue, and Alice Chia, who took the time this morning away from their really busy lives and their careers to be with us and to talk about their research. Francesca Fee from UCSB, our fourth awardee, is with us in spirit. I'm Yana Lamb, research analyst at UCEAP, and I'm here to kick off this presentation. So we're going to cover some basic facts about the award, and then I'm going to get out of the way so you can hear from Alice, Derek, and Peter, and then we'll have a Q&A session with them. And then finally, we'll have some takeaways for everyone who's interested in the award applications for next year, how to prepare themselves or other people for those awards. And we're going to start with addressing some basic questions about the awards and some research opportunities abroad more generally. Are there any research opportunities abroad? Yes, absolutely. We have programs that are designed to help students engage in research across non-STEM and STEM disciplines. And we also have independent study opportunities across many of our program sites. And then, these students in those independent study program sites can take more initiative in the kinds of projects they want to do. We're really lucky that a lot of our UC students are taking advantage of these opportunities and doing amazing research on their programs and telling us about it. So that's what the Undergraduate Research Awards is all about. Essentially, it's held annually just so that students can tell us about the outstanding research projects that they're doing. The research can be done in any discipline, and this year with our funds, we were able to award 4 projects. The project requirements are that the project or the paper that's based on the research need to be completed by spring term, and the applicants have to be undergraduates at the UC, be UC students within 6 months of the application deadline in August, and they have to have done their research while on UCAP. The application materials had 6 components. There's a form, and then there are 3 parts of a student statement that includes a program description, a project description, and then a short essay on the impact of their education abroad experience. And they also have to submit a faculty letter of recommendation. And then this part is optional, but we really highly encourage project output to be submitted. And project output could be their final paper, their presentation, videos, images of their project. And then how we evaluate the projects are a list of 6 criteria. There's the level of scholarship, which is basically the quality of their research, the degree of innovation of their project, the faculty recommendation, how their knowledge of the local culture or language was incorporated into the project, and how program site resources were leveraged or used. And then finally, how the study abroad experience transformed them. Now, this timeline doesn't vary much year after year, but sometimes we select awardees earlier based on the schedule of the award committee members and how many applications we get. So this year we received a record 25 applications, woohoo! And we usually launch the application in the spring, and then we make ongoing announcements until August 1st when the applications close. And then during the end of the month, we make the selection and we notify our awardees soon after. So if you're familiar with the National Forum for Education Abroad's award for academic achievement abroad, then kind of the UCAP Research Award application materials and our evaluation criteria is going to sound really similar. And that's completely by design. We intentionally model everything after the Forms Award. And the reason is we want to make it easy for students to then apply for the national award. And then we can also give some general feedback specific to their applications. To the awardees and the applicants before the form deadline, which is actually tomorrow, September 15th. And I think all of our awardees have a really good shot at getting the award. If they haven't yet applied, the window hasn't closed. So now on to our awardees. So our awardees are presenting in last name alphabetical order, and first up is Peter Palambi from UC Berkeley, and who was a participant in our tropical biology and conservation program and the Monteverde Institute in Costa Rica in the spring of 2023. Peter's project really wowed the awards committee for having multiple discoveries and insights made, and it was evident how in this really structured research program, how Peter's project demonstrated so much initiative. You might have some questions for the awardees that come up, and then you can just put them in the chat, and we'll address them during the Q&A section. So without further ado, Peter Palambi's program experience and research on a very interesting species. Take it away, Peter.
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter. I'm currently in my last semester at UC Berkeley, and I had the pleasure of studying abroad in Costa Rica over the spring. I didn't really know what to expect from the program because there wasn't that much information about it. I didn't know many students that had done it in the past, but I was really looking forward to it, and I couldn't have asked for a better experience. So the program setup is really interesting. You kind of move around Costa Rica. So you spend a week at Sierpe River Camp in the southwest of the country, and then a week in the tropical dry forest in Santa Rosa. And then you spend a majority of the rest of the program in Monteverde, which is in the tropical cloud forest of Costa Rica. So these pictures, the two on the left, that waterfall was by the Estacion where we were staying in Monteverde. The middle picture is of the Estacion, where I spent many weeks and did most of my research. When we were in Santa Rosa, we got to watch a prescribed burn of a grassland, which was really cool. And then that picture on the right is me at a farm during our agroecology class. So while I was there, I was doing a lot of studying of community ecology, tropical diversity, as well as Spanish and agroecology. Next slide, please. So for my research, I was introduced to this little worm in the rainforest or in the cloud forest, and I was very taken aback. I thought it was very cool the way that it builds these webs. So I'm not sure if you can see it. It's that little kind of white opaque line, and then it's hanging horizontally on a web with a bunch of vertical hanging webs. And this is actually the larvae of a predatory fungus gnat. So some people might know like glowworms from Australia and New Zealand. This is in the same family as those. So these larvae use those sticky threads that they hang to catch insects to eat. And this is only during their larval stage. Next slide, please. So this is a closer picture of that same larvae. You can see they're kind of translucent, and they build those threads, the vertical hanging threads, out of mucus. You can see that the larvae in this image is actually building one when the picture was taken. So one thing that I was interested in is I was monitoring these larvae. I was looking for them for weeks before the program or our research actually started. And I noticed that some days they would build more webs than others. And I thought that that was really interesting. Next slide, please. So the specific genus, or could you go back one really quick? So yeah, so this, the specific specimen that I was studying is part of the genus Neodytomia, which we found out with the help of a taxonomist in the Czech Republic named Jan Sevcik. The next slide. So for my research, I was doing surveys of the larvae, which began with finding the larvae in the jungle or in the rainforest. This took about 2 or 3 weeks, and I was able to locate a substantial amount of the larvae, enough for sampling. And then I tagged them all, and then I was surveying them for 2 weeks at night, after 7 p.m. and then in the morning at 4:30 a.m. for multiple days. And this is because I thought that they were nocturnal based off of preliminary observations, but that ended up being proved wrong. So on the left, you can see the typical habitat that these would be found in. And then on the right, everywhere that there's an orange tag is actually the location of a larvae. And then next slide, please. So I had some pretty interesting results. The variables that I was measuring were temperature, humidity, wind speed, if it rained or not, and then activity of the larvae. So for wind speed, I was measuring the wind speed at the wall and then also right off of the wall, on the path where the larvae were found. And I found that almost all of these variables had some sort of effect on the larvae, primarily temperature. But I was able to discover a relationship between temperature and humidity that kind of explained the behavior of these larvae. So when the temperature dropped at night, the humidity increased. And with an increased humidity, the webs created by the larvae are at less of a risk of desiccation. I also found that the presence of wind on the path kind of prevents the larvae from building threads at all, as they're very delicate, and they can like get stuck to each other. And I found that after precipitation events, there was a greater number of threads and average thread length. So with this graph on the right, you can see that after rain, there's just a reduction in the number of shorter threads. So like 1 centimeter and below, there aren't really any threads that were produced that small. And then also you see like a slight increase in the length up at the top right there. The next slide. So this was one of my favorite graphs that I made. So there were 2 rain events during my survey period. We have time on the x-axis and then 3 variables on the y. So you can see that there were 2 rain events, one on 5/16 and one on 5/19. And then associated with that, you can see an increase in the number of threads, which is directly above that. So there's like 2 little bumps that follow those. And then also an increase in actively building threads. Okay, and then next slide. I think the coolest part of my research was that I was actually able to discover 3 new species. I'm kind of running out of time, so I might have to go over this a little bit quickly. But the first was that I was able to collect the first adult specimen of the fly that I was studying. So we were able to figure out that that was part of the Neodotomia genus, but it is a new species, so it hasn't been described yet. Next slide. So this is a parasitic wasp that I also discovered. It's an endoparasite of the larvae of the fly. So on the left, you can see its pupatorium and or puparium, sorry. And then on the right, you can see the adult specimen. Next slide.
Right.
So third, this is another parasite, a hyperparasite, we believe, that parasitizes the parasite of the megastylus larvae inside of the fly. This one was very interesting, and we've only been able to get it down to a family, which is Chalcididae. But yeah, very cool. And then my last slide. I think my study abroad experience was really, really amazing. This was my first time leaving the United States, and it was really cool to be like very, very immersed in very rich culture and just different way of daily life. Everybody was extremely hospitable, and we had a host family portion, and that was really, really awesome and just a great experience. I loved how fast-paced the whole program was, and it was very intense academically and rigorous. And it just kind of helped me to prove to myself that I'm pretty capable of whatever it is that I set my mind to. Most importantly, I think I made some really great friends as well. And I really hope to go back to Costa Rica to continue my research. Cool.
All right. Thank you
And
so
that's
much,
it.
Peter. Thank you so much, Peter. That was awesome. Our next awardee is Jerica Sue from UCLA, who studied abroad in the summer in Cambridge program in England. of 2022. And Derica's research is on the sensitive but important topic of suicide risk factors and potential mitigation strategies for individuals on the autism spectrum. It was very apparent to the committee that Derica's project stood out not only for the social significance of the subject matter, but also for the high level of scholarship, particularly the theoretical gap that she highlighted in the literature. It was also evident, as it was for all of our awardees, that Derica will be someone to look out for in her field of research. I'm so excited that Derica will be sharing her project and her experience with everyone this morning. Go for it, Derica.
Thanks for the lovely introduction. Yeah, next slide, please. So I spent my summer in Cambridge. It was about a 6-week period. And it was like very demanding and rigorous. And something that I found really interesting is that it has a very like different sort of teaching style than what I'm used to at UCLA. They use the Cambridge method, which is like it's more of like a like writing intensive and more discussion based. So instead of like having like lectures every other day and then like a smaller discussion, we would have shorter lectures but more discussion sections, which I really found that I thrived in. Um, and I studied abroad with a lot of other study abroad students from across the world. Like there were students from like Hong Kong, there were students from like South America, there were students from Europe. And yeah, overall, it was a great experience. Next slide, please. So my project was done during a one-on-one like supervision section with a professor at Cambridge. Her name is Dr. Tanya Precision. And I would first like to acknowledge that she is a very good supervisor. And so together, I identified a literature gap, which is that there is very little research on autism and suicide. Although I will not be going into any details about suicide, I just wanted to give everyone a warning that I will be talking about like theories surrounding suicide. So if you are uncomfortable with that, please like feel free to not listen. So I did a comprehensive review of the current literature, which was not very much. So basically what I found is that more research is needed, but I feel like that's kind of how it is for a lot of papers. So something that I wanted to do is that I wanted to identify the risk factors for suicide among autistic people, and also I wanted to critique an existing model of suicide. It's called the interpersonal theory of suicide, which I will go over on the next slide. So the timeline for this paper was that I finished it in August of 2022. I submitted it for publication and I reviewed the editorial comments. And then I ended up publishing it a couple months ago. So yay. Next slide, please. So this is the interpersonal theory of suicide, which was created by Van Orden et al. In 2010. And then that was for like neurotypical people, aka people who are not on the autism, who are not like on the autism spectrum. And then it was modified later by Pelton and Cassidy in 2017 for autistic people specifically. So the theory describes multiple factors that may result in autistic people attempting suicide. These include perceived burdensomeness, which is thoughts like I am a burden, also known as PB. Thwarted belonging, which is thoughts like I am alone, also known as TB, and capability for suicide, which is like access to firearms, for example. And so I critiqued the model in my paper. I discovered that there might be a gap between PB and TB. I thought that there could be like traits that overlap the two. As you can see in the diagram, the gray area is where I identified the gap. Although the suicidal ideation had already existed then, I felt like things like deficits in communication, black and white thinking, and unemployment, which are characteristics or like traits of like autistic people, I thought that that would be significant. Next slide, please. So some key takeaways from the paper is that I identified an area that this was a high priority area of research among autism stakeholders. Stakeholders are basically like people with autism, their families, people who work with people with autism, things like that. And also I found that there are not enough studies on what causes increased risk of suicide for autistic people. Although it has been like up and coming, there is still not quite enough research on this. And there's not enough research on how to prevent suicide in this high-risk population, even though, like I said before, it's a high priority area of research because people are literally dying. There is not enough research on how we can like prevent this. And also we need to test the adapted IPTS model. How we do that is a little bit difficult because theories don't always translate into reality. So yeah, that is some area for future research. And then the last thing I found is that we need to better support people, autistic people who are suicidal, because like I said before, it's an area of high priority and there's not enough research on this. So we need to better support people who are suicidal and on the spectrum. Next slide, please. So some advice for future study abroad students. I found that it was somewhat difficult for me to create a work-life balance based on other people's suggestions. So I recommend like creating a work-life balance that works for you. Personally, mine is like high work, less life. But that's what worked for me, and I was able to put out this wonderful project. So I found that I didn't really need to listen to what other people did. I could just like find out on my own what worked for me. Also to cherish the connections that you've made. It was very valuable for me to be able to have this one-on-one opportunity with the faculty member at Cambridge. And to this day, I'm still in contact with her. And I still like talk to her every once in a while. I notified her of my my award, of course, and she was very happy for me. And also to take advantage of opportunities that have come up, like for example, this award. And I was actually able to present my project at an international conference in Sweden earlier this year. So that was an opportunity that I would definitely never forget. And if you could just play the video really quickly, that will conclude my presentation. This is just like a collage of pictures that I took while I was in Cambridge.
All
Yeah,
right,
that's
thank
it.
you so much. Oh, thank you so much, Derica. That was amazing. Our final presenter today is Alice Chia from UC Berkeley, who studied at the University of Bordeaux in France in the spring. And the backstory for Alice's research topic really grabbed the committee's attention, but it was really the quality, the scope of Alice's research, and then how much the research was both rooted in the place for studies and then also extending to the perceptions of another culture's art and architecture. All of those things really impressed the committee. So we're so honored to have Alice present her experience and her research. So I'm going to hand it over to Alice now.
Thank you so much, Nina. Hi, this is Alice, and I'm going to present my research seeing China in French voyage picturesque in the 1900s. So let's start with my program in Bordeaux. It was very interesting. It was a very it's a experience was like definitely like two threads of things. I would say is there's the good aspects and there are also the kind of disappointing aspects. I was glad to make friends with some students in my classes, and this is Lucy you're seeing. But disappointment comes in when I realized that a school and curriculum is not as rigorous as UC Berkeley and as I was used to. And while I couldn't get much support on my research from the faculty at the University of Bordeaux-Montaigne, I was able to explore the places and research and libraries myself better. It really, helped me to walk out of my comfort zone as, being spoiled at UC Berkeley and while professors hand you some materials that you can look into. And I think Bordeaux is very interesting. I chose this program because I think it's very Bordeaux's a peaceful town, and so wine town is very cultured. But we ended up facing the pension protest at the last month of school, so I only had basically 7 weeks of school in Bordeaux. Very interesting. Next slide, please. Going to the project subject and the work. So there's just one day I was hanging out with Lucy right after we're having the steak. And as you've seen, we were at the book flea market in Bordeaux, and I was just looking around. I spot this illustration coming from the book Voyage Pittoresque autour du monde, which means a voyage picturesque around the world. I was just shocked because the first moment I recognized that the people depicted in this image is the Chinese people in the Qing dynasty. And I take a closer look at the little words, printed, labeled, the illustrations, and one says "une vue de Canton," a view of Canton, which is the nowadays Guangzhou, 2 hours driving from my hometown Shenzhen, and that really just sort of I was so excited because such a more like civil and folk description and imagery of people in South China is very rare to see in Qing Dynasty, and I was just shocked, to see that episode of life of the predecessors on the land, where I am originally from. And to look into the story of this illustration, I checked out the other illustrations of the Chinese in France as well as Europe before, during, and after the period of when this illustration was published. Next slide, please. And in this project, I identify a very important sort of sector about studying picturesque and the study of picturesque, because what we're looking at right now is French picturesque, and French picturesque has way more factors and subgenres of subtypes of picturesque and definition under French picturesque, and voyage picturesque is a popular form of publication. And eventually, this research, I discovered that even though the illustrations of the market in Canton is awesome, is beautiful, but it include that sort of synthetic realness created by the illustrator. These illustrations are based on the previous illustrations brought by British and Netherlands embassy, and the illustrator of this book, picked up certain I would say, as I listed, simplified the symbols and the mystified architectures, that he have seen, from his peer sketch and the previous illustration. And I think the major misuse was on the architecture of, in English, pagoda, but in Chinese, it can be ta, but it will sometimes be misused on the type of architecture of pavilion ting. So I try to highlight that even though this image has been, sort of having that realness of looking close to what reality is, but is not completely true and provides false information and a stereotypical illustration method that have been used on the illustrations that referenced voyage picturesque autour du monde, as well as the architecture of Chinese pavilion in World Exposition. Next slide, please. And I think talking about this abroad study experience, I think being in Bordeaux, I was definitely able to learn French following the class curriculums, but I was also be able to practice the language outside of the courses by going to a library and archives. I've never walked into archives before this. I was like scary, but in French, but it was awesome. Like I ended up having no trouble talking to the staff there, and they were so happy to help me and find materials for me. And I think another aspect I've seen in this research is that I didn't get much support from faculties at University of Bordeaux. It was really, about me piloting the whole thing, and I contact my faculty is close to me in Berkeley, once a month, and like I only talked to her for 2 times during the whole research when I was in Bordeaux. I think it really, came down to myself, my personal self, to sort of push it through and try to like make this happen, because it was actually a very demanding research that I have to collect materials and read so many literatures in French, as well as finding exclusive articles by writers in Bordeaux talked about the relationship of merchants in Bordeaux and their story and interaction in China. And I think I really found out the sort of courage and determination I've never really spotted in myself in this research, just to push it through and trust in yourself, I would say. Yes, I think that's all about my experience in Bordeaux and my research. Thanks. Next slide. That won't be me.
That was great. Thank you so much, Alice. So our 4th awardee is Francesca Fee from UCSB, who went on the Marine Biology and Terrestrial Ecology program at the University of Queensland in Australia last fall. So Francesca's research was on microplastics in seagrass, and it has so much ecological value. Her research actually provides evidence that seagrass beds are harboring a lot of microplastic pollution, and the research suggests a link for how microplastics enter the marine food web. So the project is, as I'll quote Professor Tibbetts saying, it's cutting edge. Francesca cannot join us today because she is a full-time scientific diver for the Cassell Lab and PISCOs at UCSB. But I do want to highlight Francesca's words about how her study abroad experience affected her. She says in her application, the research projects I conducted gave me valuable experience in project brainstorming and planning, fieldwork, data collection and analysis, and writing a complete report that utilizes many scientific references. Completing these 2 research projects from start to finish solidified my goal of pursuing my own research. So bravo to Peter, Derica, Alice, and Francesca on their achievements. And after hearing Peter, Derica, and Alice talk, I'm actually more in awe of them and their research than I was reading their research. And I just want to thank you, all of the awardees, for bringing your projects to life. And with that, it's now time to move to Q&A so we can ask our awardees questions. We have some questions that we've already posted up, but I see that there is a question already in the chat, and this one goes out to Peter from Wallane. Peter, were you curious about bugs before this experience, or was it a result of your time in research in Costa Rica?
So when I was a kid, I used to go out with my dad and we would collect bugs at this nature reserve near where I grew up. But that was like for a few years, and then I kind of lost interest. And I didn't really like consider myself somebody that was that interested in bugs. But when you're in an ecosystem like the cloud forest or tropical rainforest, that's like all you're surrounded by. They're like the most plentiful organism are bugs of many, many different types. And so I found myself like really captivated, not only with the species that I was studying, but there was an on-site entomologist named Kenji Nishida, and he was doing light traps every single day. So I got to see lots of moths and flies and lots of beetles. And I would say that now I'm way more interested in bugs than I was prior.
Thank you,
Thank
Peter, for
you.
sharing that. Thank you, Elaine, for that question. Derica, I have a question for you. So you had a little bit of advice for future UCEAP students, but I'm curious about what you think is the most challenging thing and what you thought was the most rewarding thing about conducting your research abroad.
I guess the most challenging thing I experienced is that like this was my first time doing any like sort of research at the college level at all. And I was like ultimately I was able to publish it, but it took a lot of work and like revising and like going back and doing more lit searches and everything like that. So it was definitely a process to navigate, but I feel like I came out of it so much better, um, like as a researcher than I was before. Like I hadn't really had much interest in research before this, and this kind of just like really like similar to Francesca, it really solidified that this was the path that I wanted to go on. And I guess that is my most rewarding part of my research project is that like I'm now a full-time autism researcher at a lab in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So yeah, it definitely helped me decide what I wanted to do in the future after college.
That's so great to hear. Thanks, Derica. Alice, I have a question for you. What advice do you have for future applicants of this award?
For this award? Okay, I think, well, definitely work on the research, and I definitely see there are lots of adversaries and difficulties that come up with it, especially being abroad and the mindset, like that psychological, you might feel like strange, or you might have a great time there, but I think both I sort of experience were gonna influence your research, but the way you research and the mind you have when you're researching. But I think just keep pushing it. I think but don't really overwork yourself, I would say, for this award. I would say it's definitely very I'm so lucky to be awarded, but take it easy. I think just write about your research and think about what it really where your passion really lies in this research, and just find that most original slice of story in your research. And for me, it's about me connecting with the people who lived on the land where I was from 200 years ago. And I would say, yes, just believe in yourself, work hard, but take it easy.
Right. Yeah, that really echoed what Derica was saying earlier about that work-life balance when you're abroad. So I appreciate that. I think we have time for a really quick question if anybody has one to share either in the chat or if they'd want to unmute. All right. Thank you for that. I think it's time for some takeaways from the committee before we close. So we have some suggestions for future applicants of this award. The first is to build connections with faculty early on. So this is important for the recommendations that students will need for the award, but also for graduate school applications and for learning, mentoring, or mentorships, and job networking. Another thing is to build a cohesive narrative. So a big component of the application is the student statement. So really use the program description and the education abroad experience parts of the statement to help your reviewer make a sense of how the research connects with the location and how those connect with yourself. Number three, make sure your research is really accessible by explaining the context of the project and the implications of the project findings. And another thing, the last thing is really to tie in cultural knowledge. There are some projects where it's naturally easier to do this, but we're, as a committee, flexible on how culture is defined. So maybe it's the culture of the program or the research site or the intellectual culture of the research topic at the university. So we really encourage students who are struggling with this criteria to consider how to define and emphasize culture in a way that makes sense for their project and location. And lastly, just to contact us with questions, you can just reach out. And then our next steps is to help future applicants learn about the awards early, to prepare for the awards earlier, and to create a space for resources for reference. And we're going to end this presentation with the biggest thank you to all of our awardees who presented today. presentation is recorded to memorialize your achievements and to offer as a potential resource to future applicants who want to know what opportunities are available in UCEAP abroad. Thank you, everybody, for showing up for this.